Hello, well I'm Brent, and this is David, and as you just heard in the introduction, we spend a lot of our time working with CEOs and executives on helping them become insignificant. And one of the things we spend a lot of time working with them on is this whole issue that we're going to talk about today, and that is leadership and stress and the management of stress. So a quick show of hands, how many of you would say that you're no stranger to stress? So whether it's now or at some point in time in your life, you've undergone a stressful situation. Not unusual at all, right? The world can be a very, very difficult place. I can tell you that as a speaker up in front of you now, I am experiencing some stress. So not only am I in front of a bunch of really smart people, and I don't want to screw up and sound stupid, but there's this 12-foot orange circle up here that they have coached me not to step outside of. And I'm one of those guys that like to move around when I talk, and so I'm a little stressed that I may step out, and I'm not sure what will happen, but I don't want to find out. I don't want to find out. Which brings up a good point about stress, and that is that not only are there different levels of stress, right? So the stress you have when they get your order at the drive-thru wrong is not nearly the kind of stress as, say, if you lose your job or if a loved one gets sick. And just like that, not all stress is bad. So I can tell you the stress I'm feeling in front of you right now is actually what I would call pretty good stress. There's not a lot of daydreaming going on up here. I'm very focused on what I'm doing. That stress is keeping me really on track. I'm not thinking about much other than what am I going to say next, and is the audience hearing what I'm saying, right? That stress, if you're walking across the street and there's a truck coming your way and you realize that truck's not going to stop, that stress that dumps all that adrenaline into your body and gives you the burst of energy to jump out of the way, that's pretty good stress, right? Saves your life. That's good stuff. But what we want to talk about, and especially in the concept of leadership, is that stress that occurs in organizations that is sort of either that medium level stress that lasts a long time or just overwhelming stress, because we know that kind of stress can have not only really bad health effects, evidence is really clear that it's bad for your health, stress is bad for your health, but what a lot of people don't know is it's also really, really bad for your brain. Recent IQ research out of Princeton University found that people that were undergoing severe financial stress would lose temporarily 25 to 40% of their IQ. 40% of their IQ. Now, I don't know about you, but I could not handle a 40% loss of my IQ. I think I would have to go work at Sports Illustrated if that happened. I would have no other option. I thought you'd appreciate that reference. Thought you'd appreciate that. But seriously, it can have very detrimental effects. I've got some other great news for you students in the audience. As you leave OSU and go out into your career and work at organizations and jobs, your exposure to stress is probably not going to go down. As you move into an organization, as you move into higher and higher levels of responsibility, as you become a parent, a father or a mother, your level of stress is going to increase. So it becomes critical for us to learn as leaders, how do we manage that stress? And that's where I do have some really good news for you. So David and I spend most of our days talking with leaders and CEOs and executives about improving their leadership, and one topic that comes up a lot is how to manage stress. And we've come to the conclusion that most of the stress that leaders face, at least to a large degree, is what we would call self-induced. These leaders have things we call blind spots that for whatever reason may be things that they are doing that they shouldn't be doing, or things that they're not doing that they should be doing, that are causing not only their level of stress, but the level of stress of those around them to be greatly increased. And so I want you to think about that for a minute. And then the concept of 40% loss of IQ, as a leader, and I can tell you, having worked in organizations spend tons and tons of money on processes and technology and things to improve productivity and efficiency, right? If you could accomplish the same thing just by adjusting your leadership and reducing stress in the organization and making your group smarter, that'd be a pretty powerful thing, right? Absolutely it would. Well, David and I have identified what we think are 3 blind spots that contribute to most of that stress, and that's what we're going to spend the rest of the time talking about.
As most of you, by the way, this is really fun because 39 years ago, almost to the day, I was sitting in that seat right there. I actually remember the seat. It was my very first class, first day at Oklahoma State University. And it was a political science course. and I was under a lot of stress in school. I now realize why my grades were what they were. My IQ was just a lot lower going through school. And now I can finally tell my parents why the grades were what they were. But whenever, whether you're a student and you're going to go into an organization or you're working in an organization today, more than likely you can go into that organization and you can get a mental snapshot of what the skill sets look like in that organization. What I mean by skill sets, the leadership skills. It doesn't take long at all before you sort of get that feeling of this is the type of leaders that we have in this organization up and down the organization. What you have to understand, it's actually those leadership skills that create the growth of an organization. Now, early on, when any type of organization first starts, there's usually just a few people, and they're sort of making decisions, and they're obviously good decisions if the company is growing. And it's actually those leadership skills that are pulling the organization up. Now, when your leadership skills are above the line, meaning they are above where you are in terms of your growth, that's actually a low-stress zone, okay? Because the decisions aren't that difficult. I know what to do. I had the ideas, so this is going to be pretty easy. I've got the vision. Everything is pretty low stress in terms of making decisions. Now, as that company grows, as that organization grows, actually those very same skills that you had, if you don't continue to work on those very same skills will begin to have the inverse effect, meaning they begin to pull the growth of the organization down. Now, what does that sound like? What that sounds like, you've probably heard it say, well, I think the organization has outgrown old Joe. Okay? What they're saying is old Joe's skill sets are below the line of where the organization goes. You may hear people say, you know, I liked it better back when. Okay? A lot of times what they're saying is, I'm in a high stress zone because my skill sets aren't keeping up with the organization. I want to go back to the low stress zone. So that whole area right there is actually a high stress zone, and you'll find that a lot in organizations. So around leadership, what you're trying to do in any organization, when a lot of you have probably been through some kind of leadership training, okay? And some of you have been through it because you just needed to check the box that that's what you're doing. But you have to understand the point of leadership development is actually to get the skill sets above the line. And when they are, things get a lot easier. For example, everything begins to look a whole lot more like low-hanging fruit instead of everything being a crisis. Okay, so if you're in a high-crisis organization, it might be that you've got too many skill sets that are sort of below that line. And it's not an intuitive connection. That's why we call it a blind spot.
One of the most significant sources of stress that we encounter is dealing with other difficult people. Would you agree with that? Whether it's the roommate that won't pick up after themselves, or the guy on the project team that didn't pull his weight, leaving you to stay up to 3 in the morning to finish the project for him, whether it's an employee that is upset and is grousing with the other employees and causing all sorts of problems in the organization, those are typically some of the most difficult problems to deal with. And leaders are faced with two particular paths that they can choose when they're facing that kind of situation. Path number one is, I'm going to ignore the problem and see if it goes away, okay? Path number two is, I'm going to go directly at that issue, have a serious conversation with that person, and see if we can't get that resolved. Now, how many of you think that most leaders choose that second path? You're exactly right. Most leaders actually take the path of, you know what, I'm going to just sort of sit around, wait it out, see what happens. Invariably, that never works. Very seldom does that work. And not only does it not work, that actually increases the level of stress in the organization, which is bad enough. But before, if you had those kinds of things going on in the organization, and the other people in the organization were blaming that other person, that teammate or whoever, after a time, what happens? They don't blame them anymore. They start blaming you as the leader for not taking care of that situation. So one blind spot that we talk about a lot is that ability to go directly at those issues, okay? And sometimes, and I will say something controversial, sometimes as a leader, that is going to require you to hurt somebody. Let me say that again. As a leader, sometimes when you have those difficult situations, you're going to hurt somebody, and that is okay. Think of it this way. How many of you have kids? A lot of you have kids. Did you ever take your kids to the dentist? Did they want to go to the dentist? No kid wants to go to the dentist, right? He wants the candy, doesn't want to go to the dentist. It hurts them to go to the dentist, right? When you have teeth drilled and those kinds of things. And yet as a parent, you take them anyway. Why is that? because in your heart, you know that's the right thing for them. You're not serving them well as a parent if you don't take them as a dentist. And I will also tell you, if you've got a level of trust with people, they will appreciate long-term what you're doing for them. Think of it this way. I was in a dinner meeting the other day with about 6 executives, and the guy across the table from me had just eaten a spinach salad, and he had this piece of spinach stuck right in his teeth right there. And I had one of those moments that, okay, it's going to embarrass him if I tell him he's got spinach in his teeth, but also, I don't want him to go through dinner, because every time he talked, you couldn't focus anything on what he was saying. It was always the spinach. So I decided I gave him one of the spinach in your teeth sort of gestures right here, and he got that. Now, would you want me to tell you if you had spinach in your teeth? Absolutely, you would. I would be upset with you if I found that I had spinach in my teeth and you didn't tell me. Most individuals in an organization are like that. They don't want to be that guy that's going through dinner with food hanging out of their mouth. So as a leader, learn to go directly at those problems with a heart of trust and love for, and service for those people, and you'll be a lot better off and reduce stress.
The final blind spot we want to talk about is the concept of learning how to say no inside of an organization. A lot of leaders contemplate decisions for long periods of time. This diagram shows what a lot of organizations look like, and what I'm referring to around decisions making is what products are we going to carry, what services, what markets are we going to go after, lots of things, how are we going to build our culture, all of those kinds of things. Most organizations have a relative good ability to understand what they're going to say yes to. They have a fair amount of knowledge around what they'll say no to, but they have a giant maybe zone. Now, maybe zone sounds like this, like, well, that's an interesting idea. Let's have 12 meetings to talk about that over the next 6 months, and we'll just see what bubbles up. And what they're looking for, they're going to wallow for 8 to 12 months trying to push that idea to a yes or a no. Just think of that as a very wallowing environment. Here's the way other organizations look like. They have a huge yes zone. It's sort of shiny object syndrome. They say yes to everything, all right? Now, what that looks like is because they've said yes to everything, they don't know it was a bad idea till about 9 months in. And then you'll hear somebody go, why are we doing that? That makes no sense whatsoever, okay? So both of those are unhealthy. When you talk about growing an organization as a leader, your goal is actually not to figure out what to say yes to. Your goal is to actually bring clarity to the whole organization of what we say no to. So we actually have real clarity around yeses and tremendous clarity around no's. And by the way, the entire organization understands the filters required to make those decisions. And we have very little in the maybe zone. That actually increases velocity and dramatically decreases stress in the organization.
We've talked about 3 primary blind spots around leadership and stress, and some of those blind spots may resonate with you. You may have something else going on, but whatever's going on in your particular situation, I'm going to leave you with 2 thoughts. The first thought is that you are not powerless against stress, okay? You are not powerless against stress. There is some stress that just naturally is going to happen to us and we can't avoid it, but there's a lot of stress in our lives that as leaders, if we change the way we behave, we can reduce that stress for ourselves and those around us. And the second point is just remember, as a leader, in your growth as a leader, the ability to manage and diffuse stress around you is an incredibly powerful thing. Just ask yourself now, if you could make your group today 40% smarter, would you do that? Absolutely you would. So you guys have been a great audience. Thank you so much for letting us do this. Thank you, OSU, for doing this. We appreciate it.